We'll call the February 26th meeting of the Middleton Board of Selectmen to order. Just want to remind everyone that the meeting is being recorded. And first up is warrants, and there are two of them, one for this week and one from 2 weeks ago when our meeting was snowed out.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. On the warrant from 2 weeks ago, which is warrant number 1917, we had $674,301 on the payroll side of the warrant, and on the bills payable side, $846,341. Notable items in there: the usual payroll deductions of $87,643. We had a couple of snow and ice items totaling about $33,000 for storm-related cleanup, about $17,000 in landfill monitoring, and $250,074 for purchase of power for Meld. On this week's warrant number 1918, on the payroll side, $662,949, and on the bills payable warrant, $3,930,611, substantially higher than the one 2 weeks ago by about $3 million. The usual payroll deductions, we had some snow removal items totaling a little over $26,000, some waste disposal at $11,488, purchase of power for Meld at $622,775, and then the couple of big ones were Masco assessment at $2.6 million, and then $311,000 and change for health insurance deductions. So, Sarah Wood, our CFO, town accountant, has reviewed all of these and requests the board's affirmative action.
Are there any questions?
Mr. Chairman, I move that we approve warrant number 1917 that was signed already, as well as warrant 1918 that was approved this evening.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Next, we have the minutes of the January 29th meeting. Are there any comments or changes?
No, Mr. Chairman.
Is there a motion?
I'll make a motion to accept the meeting minutes from January 29th, 2019.
Is there a second?
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
I'll abstain as I was absent.
Right. Next, the town administrator update and reports, Andy.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. As we've talked about quite a number of times over the last several months, we're in the midst of the budget development process. We had our first all-day budget summit about 3 weeks ago on February 2nd. We've got our second one this Saturday on March 2nd, beginning at 8:15 here at Fuller Meadow. For those interested, those watching at home that are interested in seeing how this process works, what we often refer to as the sausage making of town budgeting, will begin at 8:15 Saturday morning. The focus of this meeting is on the capital budget, but there'll also be an update on the operating budget. For the board's information, there's still a number of items that we're working through. We expect to distribute the information to you tomorrow or Thursday at the latest, and we'll post it on the website. We're still waiting on elementary school and Masco budgets, so there will remain, on the operating side at least, a few big gaps that won't be resolved by Saturday, certainly, or on Saturday. So for folks interested at home, the capital budget request will be put on the website. If you go to our homepage, you hover over government and then click on budgets and then fiscal 20 capital budget, and you can see the whole thing. The operating budget is there as well. We continue to watch the North Liberty Street Bridge. Anybody who's driven it recently will notice that there are some additional plates up there. So we're keeping an eye on that, making sure that, that everything is okay up there. As you'll recall, we received a $500,000 grant from the state for the design and replacement of that bridge. We've talked a bit about it before. The nature of the work really requires that we do this during the lowest water time of the season. So we're looking at probably July before we can really get in there and do that work. We'd love to be able to get in there sooner. The design's going to take a while. Permitting will take a while, and then ideally we want to have it at low flow periods. So July is what we're looking at for that project. So we'll talk a little bit later about the special town meeting. I have done a number of drop-in sessions since the board last met at Memorial Hall, at the library. I've got one tomorrow at the Council on Aging. I'll be there for a meeting with the Council on Aging Board, and I'll hang around and answer questions that folks have. But I do have 2 additional information sessions, one tomorrow night here at the Fuller Meadow School at the cafeteria, and next Tuesday on March 5th, also here at Fuller Meadow, both beginning at 7 o'clock. These meetings will be recorded and rebroadcast. We cannot broadcast live from across the hall, but we can record and rebroadcast on cable and streaming. And then finally, thanks to Public Works and everybody else involved in the recent storm events that we've had, and particularly yesterday's windstorm. We had a fair amount of tree damage and limbs down, so.
Anything of substantial size?
No, nothing that came to my desk, and I didn't hear about any outages. If there were, they were short-lived. So we're really fortunate with Meld over the last 20 or 30 years has really invested in their infrastructure, and so it can withstand a lot of the hits that would normally bring down wires in other areas. Those diamond-shaped brackets that hold the wires, referred to as Hendrix cable, super strong, and usually the pole breaks before the wires break. So a lot of foresight into that over the decades, and really pays off in a storm like we had yesterday or in some of these other events. So, but thank you for the workers who were out there last night, and thank you to the residents for their patience in seeing us through the cleanup, and for also the consideration shown to plow drivers and other workers out on the streets. That's all I got.
Any questions? Well, Andy, how has attendance been at your drop-in sessions?
Drop-ins were a little sparse, and maybe in hindsight, learning from it, maybe it's not the best forum. Maybe a more traditional informational session is a better way to approach it. The informational sessions I had back in the fall, I had probably 30, 40 people at both of them. These drop-in sessions, I had a handful at each of them. So good input from the folks that were there. It didn't touch a lot of people, though. So I'm hopeful for a good turnout tomorrow night and next Tuesday.
Very good. Anything else?
No.
All right, we'll move on to our first agenda item, which is a vote to lay out Lewis Drive, and we have Melissa Ogden of Man and Man.
Good evening. Melissa Ogden of Man and Man on behalf of PrimeCap LLP, the developer of the Lewis Drive subdivision, and we're here for the layout and acceptance of Lewis Way as a public road.
And all the work that's needed to be done by the planning board, has been done. And I noticed in our packet that there was information from the planning board that, they have taken, a vote, to recommend, to town meeting that, the
That's
road
correct.
be accepted.
Yes, that's
Okay.
correct.
So this vote tonight is just moves the process, along. Are there any questions?
I don't. Mr. Chairman, I move that, sorry, was there a question? Oh, I thought there was a question. No, I move that we vote to lay out Lewis Drive as a public way in accordance with Mass General Law, Chapter 82, subsection 21 through 23, and Chapters 383 of the Middleton Town Code, known as Lewis Drive, location off of South Main Street.
Is there a second?
I'll second.
Any other discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Thank you.
Thank you.
So Tony's not here yet,
So we'll continue. We also, have a letter to Secretary Matthew Beaton regarding the Maple Street project. So, Andy, could you go over that, please?
Sure. This letter is a result of the meeting that we had with the legislative delegation beginning of January. One of the recommendations that Senator Tarr in particular made was that we follow up with Secretary Beaton to sort of remind him that this project was part of the environmental bond bill. A statement in the bond bill doesn't necessarily carry with it an appropriation, or doesn't carry with it an appropriation. That comes as part of the governor's capital plan. So the senator's recommendation to us, and affirmed by Representatives Jones and Spiliotis, was that we follow up with a letter to the secretary. So we've addressed some of the issues that we've talked about over time with the Maple Street corridor, all of the development that has taken place there by institutional public or state entities, Essex Tech, the Essex Rec, the Regional Dispatch Center, the DYS Center, the Intake Center at the jail, some other things. All of those developments happened without any kind of mitigation or any addressing of the impacts of the projects. Essex Sports being the other biggie. And so we've been sort of banging that drum for the last several years to try to build the case for funding for the redesign and improvement on the Maple Street corridor. And I think the delegation recognizes that, and that's what led to that inclusion in the bond bill. But thought it was worth bringing that to Secretary Beaton's attention. I don't know that he had heard that before, so.
Any comments on the draft letter?
Succinct and to the point.
All right, so we should have,
Do you want a motion on that?
yeah, who might as well.
Mr. Chairman, I move that the Board of Selectmen approve, sign, and send to Secretary Beaton the enclosed letter regarding the bond bill and the funding for Maple Street.
Is there a second?
Second?
All in favor?
Aye.
Okay. So now we'll,
Tony is here for the.
yes, so we'll go to our 7:15 agenda item, which is the exit conference with our auditor, Tony Roselli of Roselli, Clark and Associates.
Is everyone?
Good, how are you?
Very good. Thank you for having me. Is that one mine? Either one?
So, this, you have better news than your first exit conference,
Yeah.
exit conference, right?
It gets better every year, and that's just a credit to management that's in place. Some of the new people that have come in that have really done a nice job to turn things around. findings are getting smaller and smaller, easier to manage. So the town's clearly trending in the right direction. So, yeah, overall, it's starting to get to be a boring audit. We have to
Well,
start
those are the
looking.
ones you can make some money on.
Yeah, start looking at, I don't mind these, though, it's great. You know, it's great to be part of a turnaround and to come in and see a place that had some disorganization and, you know, just set the wheels in motion, and then actually have the players execute with the plan and come through and fix it. It's just, it's good to be part of that, so I'm happy to see it, not complaining at all. This year, we went down to the Public Works, and those guys are in attendance, so we'll get to that, and, you know, after we go through some of the town things. And overall, that was pretty good. There were some things that we'd like to talk about and see them put in place that we'll go down and check on at the end of the next audit.
But you had a lot of good things to say about the department administrator.
Which one is the department administrator?
Boss down there.
The arm was getting twisted. Yeah, but no, they've done a nice job down there. Like I said, there are some things that we had recommended that we went through with them and said, hey, might be a better way to do such and such, and we can get into the detail of it as we go. So first of all, usually I open with the town operations, and I'll do that again, and just echoing the remarks of the prior year. The town used some free cash, but you still managed to increase your unassigned fund balance by $100,000. You even left $800,000 in levy capacity. So that's great. So you're giving the taxpayers a tax break. You're using free cash in a diligent way, and you've still increased your unassigned fund balance. So what I see this setting up for a really good bond rating, is what I'm seeing. And I know that time's coming soon, probably within the next 12 months, Andy?
Yes.
There's some debt coming down that's gonna get you involved in.
Yeah, there'll be some debt later this year.
Yeah, so what I did was I put the chart that I put up, which is the one I put up every year and just kind of updated it, is the Standard & Poor reserve ratio analysis. And they like to see 15%, your reserve ratio at 15%. And then your reserve ratio is made up of your unassigned fund balance and your assigned fund balance in the general fund. Okay, it's not the same as free cash. It's a different formula here. When you add those two, it includes stabilization funds. I just want to make that clear. Undesignated funds in your general fund. So there's a whole bunch of things that go into this. When you take those factors and divide it by your expenses, they like to see you above 15%. If you're above 15%, they score you a 1 on what's called liquidity analysis, which is very, very important. You're already getting very good grades because you're 20 miles away from Boston. You're in a heavily metropolitan area. You're close to a heavy metropolitan area, so you're getting good grades for that already. I'm anticipating that you'll get good grades for your policies and procedures, because those are moving right along and are much better than where they were 3 years ago. There's a portion of the grade that goes to that. There's a portion of the grade that goes to this reserve ratio. And then also debt levels. They look at your debt levels. They look at your cash levels. Those are all very strong in Middleton. So I think you're trending towards a really good situation. And I'm going to look forward to the day that happens, and hopefully I can participate in the conference call with you folks to add any leverage to that if I can, as we're going through that. So let's talk about OPEB too. OPEB is going up. You're at 1.1 million now. It earned about 100,000 in investment earnings. You put in 50,000. So that's, again, they like to see things like that, looking at long-term liabilities and what the town's doing in that regard. So any questions on the overall economic side of the business?
If the bond rating goes up, one level, is there any kind of indication of what that means in terms of reduced interest rate?
Yeah, it's, I mean, if somehow you got to a AAA, which is a stretch, I believe Boxford is a AAA right now. Topsfield's a AA plus.
Southfield just got upgraded to a triple.
They got to AAA.
Yeah.
So well, that's really good. So the two neighboring and part of the Tri-Town are both at AAA. And, yeah, if you're going from AA to AAA, that's a big jump. That's like, I believe, 60 basis points. So that's a nice jump. Staying in the AA family, because there's 3 different notches. You have AA minus, AA plus. Right now, I believe you're grading out somewhere around a AA minus on the Moody's scale. So if you go to S&P, I automatically see that going into a AA because they're usually at least one grade up. And then with some of the other things you're doing, I would expect you to be going towards a AA plus on this. Maybe with a strong wind, you hit that AAA, but I don't think it'll happen the first time
So
around.
what other things do you think would be needed to see a AAA rating? And I ask that because while we, if we're successful at our special town meeting with the acquisition of the land for future building needs, we may not be at a fully bonded status yet for several years, so.
Yeah, some of the things could be out of your control, like your demographics, your salary levels in town aren't quite as high as the other 2 towns, because you've got more of a mix here in Middleton.
And we have the jail, who has no income.
You've got some exempt property, right, more exempt property.
Well, I mean,
2 jails.
well, yeah, the prisoners are in our
Census.
census, but they contribute nothing to our income. So the average income when you know.
But that's something we'd have to bring up at the meeting, because you're not providing public work services to the prisoners. You're not
We're providing police and fire.
police and fire, but a lot of, like, education, it's not being provided to the prisoners. So when they look at the raw number, it's gonna be lower, but when you start explaining these things, it gets factored in. So that's something we'd have to do a good job of explaining. So like I said, the things that are in your control, I think you're controlling. I think you're doing a great job. Andrew, correct me if I'm wrong, are there policies and procedures finalized at this
Yes,
point?
yep.
And adopted.
Yeah, they were adopted last year.
About a year, so you'll be, by the time you get your bond rating, you'll be a couple of years into that.
Correct.
They generally don't like to give you the top grade on your policies and procedures till there's a little history there.
So is a town having a CAFR make a difference?
No, on the bond rating. The only thing a CAFA will do, which I think you're already going to do well on, is your management score. It'll just show that you're more organized, you're able to put together a much more comprehensive report, so it may increase your management score a little bit, but it really won't do much of a difference to the overall bond rating. I mean, we've talked about a CAFA,
Yeah,
and
right.
we do a bunch of them, throughout the state, and I'd be happy to help you through that process if that's something the town wanted to do.
In terms of the policy, Tony, or policies, so you know, we had them in draft at this time last year when we were building the budget for fiscal 19. We adhered to them, even though they weren't formally adopted till April. We're adhering to them again. We'll be in conformance with them again this year. So even though they won't have been in place for 2 years, they'll have been essentially in effect for 2 years. So hopefully that carries some weight.
No, the other thing, when the Howe Manning bond was, the review was done, for that, there was a comment that really the only way our bond rating will go up is if the wealth of the community goes up.
Right. And that's one of those beyond our control items.
That's the beyond the control.
Well, there's been a significant amount of construction that's happened that is likely going to lead to that number going up.
Okay.
Any other questions on the economic side of the business? Okay, so on the current year findings, there's a handful of them before we get to the Public Works review. So one of the things that's kind of snuck up on the entire municipal community is interest rates have started to go back up. The FOMC, Federal Open Market Committee, had some aggressive moves during the 12-month period that included fiscal 18, where the central bank increased rates. The negative of that is the borrowing side goes up, but the positive is the investment side goes up too. Now, what I found in these situations is the banks don't call you and say, hey, guys, you know, rates just went up 1%. Do you want to move that fund from this to this so you can earn more?
They don't do that?
No, they don't do that. Because every single audit, every single one, and we've done about 60 of them this year, and I won't say every single one, maybe 2 of them had already made some moves to some good interest rates, but 58 treasurers were still at 0.4, 0.5. They were under 1. And when I mentioned it to them, they hadn't really realized that the rates had bumped up that much. And like I said, it kind of happened really quick. So if you remember back in like 15 years ago, back in 2005, rates were around 4 or 5%. And then you had the credit crisis that knocked everything down at 0.1, 0.2. And it stayed like that for about 8 or 9 years. So treasurers weren't trained. They weren't in the habit of every month checking bank scores, where the rate's at. So they formed bad habits. And I'm out there now. It's in about every management letter. It's not an indictment of the town. It's there. It's across the board, and everyone's saying, yeah, we got to do a better job on that. So I put it here as a reminder to look at some what's out there. Hopefully, with your existing banks, it stinks to switch banks. But if your existing banks aren't going to give you good rates,
Switch banks.
call around and make the switch. You don't want to switch every month. It's just a pain.
So I think
to go through
did
it.
we recently go out for bid? Or at least do a solicitation about a year or 2 ago with the banks?
We moved a lot of our investments into, well, we moved the things that we could move into Pritt, and then we moved a number of things into Bartholomew.
Okay.
And,
A lot of that is the trust accounts.
Yeah.
yeah, and so that's done well, but there's a lot of other accounts that are at sort of smaller banks.
Yeah, right,
and,
right.
And sometimes, you know, in talking with Tony, sometimes it's as simple as a call to say, can you do anything better than 0.2, whatever it happens to
Yeah,
be.
so how much in these accounts, what's sort of the aggregate dollar value that we might be
There's
talking?
about $7 million I've got here that are in banks that at June 30th were earning 0.25 to 0.95. And quick math, MMDT is at 2%. The MMDT is a state pool. It's liquid. You don't have to tie your money up like a CD. It's not time sensitive. You can move in and out of it. You've got a certain amount of transactions you can do in a month, but it's fairly liquid. So if you add 1% times 7 million, it's $70,000. I'm not saying you're going to invest the entire 7 million into MMDT, but that's just some quick math. So there's certainly room for your investment returns to increase, at least for 2020, if you start that planning process now. And the other thing that happened is the new treasurer was just taking over for the old treasurer right around when all this was happening. So that, you know, kind of got lost in the mix a little bit too.
Are there limitations as to the kinds of banks or financial institutions the money can go into?
On the trust side, you have, which isn't critical because that doesn't affect your budget and your estimated revenues, but on the trust side, you can basically use prudent investors, so you can invest in stocks, fixed income, whatever you need to be. On the general fund side, special revenue funds, things like that, which I call general accounts, those you have to basically stay in a simple banks. You can do CDs, you can do money markets, even mutual funds. You kind of got to see what you're getting into before you can invest in mutual funds. But it's pretty basic investing. So you're really capped on that sort of stuff at the CD rates or the MMDT rates. I know the CD rates are up close to 3% now, but now you got to do cash flow to see, do I want to tie my money up for 9 months to a year? Can we afford to do that?
But, when asked, financial institution, you can do it, federally chartered banks, state chartered banks, credit unions, they're all.
Yep, as long as they have a charter to do business in Massachusetts. You also, there's a service out there called VeryBank. I'm not sure if the treasurer watches that or not, but that will tell you how solvent or how good a bank is. Is it about to fail? Is it not? And it grades it 1 star to 5 stars, and that comes out every quarter, a report. Fairly inexpensive. I don't know if Belinda uses that or not.
But sure.
But back in the day, back in the 90s, when rates were even much higher, people used to use that a lot, the VeryBank report, because they're saying, hey, I can earn 7%, but let me assess how good this bank is and how solvent it is. So those are just things that can be done on the investment side. Definitely some room for improvement there. You got a new treasurer. Just get on the phone, start making some phone calls, and see what can be done. Like I said, if you can stay with your existing banks, that's the best. But if they can't accommodate you, you should be looking around. Okay. Encumbrances. So we had a finding on encumbrances 2 years ago, and the practice ceased. So in 17, it was gone. And it happened again in 18. I think there was a miscommunication with how there was an active negotiation on contracts, so the funds were held over. And the state doesn't allow that. I think it allows it only for 30 days. So if you resolve the contract within 30 days of the next year, then you're allowed to do that. But if negotiations keep going, you've got to basically squash that.
So if you are at anything past May 30th, 31st, and you haven't agreed to a contract yet, once June 30th comes, you are not encumbering.
Right, you can't
Even if you
encumber
are getting ready to put pen to ink on a contract.
Well, if you can do it, I think the rule of thumb is before the end of July. If you can do it
Okay,
within
30
the
days
30
prior,
days.
post, okay, through July 30th,
Yeah,
okay.
and I think this one was still was extending a little further. So I'm not sure if she reversed the encumbrances and resubmitted free cash or not. I'm not sure how the
No, I don't,
It's going to close out at the end of 19.
just close it out. So
Yeah.
they left it alone. They didn't use it. It's just going to close out.
okay.
Fire department details, there was about $13,000 deficit, which means you provided services, you've paid the payrolls, but you haven't collected. So it's about $13,000. This was a little bit of a problem when we first started auditing the town with both police and fire. The fire one was very small. The police one was a little bigger, but it got raised on the either got raised on the recap or got taken care of at a town meeting, I forget, but it got taken care of. So that one seems to be on target now. The fire one has expanded a little bit. It's gotten,
Is it normal that the police or firemen get their pay before the town collects? Is that the normal procedure?
that's pretty normal, yeah, because you're gonna be fighting.
I think it's by our contract that we have signed with the respective unions. So is this a couple of folks that are not paying, or is this a pattern of not paying by?
I think it's a couple of folks not paying. What Sarah has suggested, and I think, Tony, she spoke to you about it, is just doing a write-off every 3 years of details like we do with other uncollectibles.
Okay, I mean, I would expect that for a fire department, detail to occur, it's likely a local business or a construction.
Generally, that's the case.
So do we have, due to the, can't remember what the article was that we did at town meeting a couple of years ago that allows us to collect on collectibles in a different way. That could also be for example, if you have certain bills that haven't been paid, you can't pull a building permit.
Right, right.
So are we tracking that? I mean, this isn't a, you know, a detail because some company was coming in and replacing a water line and
Right, I think these are
day was gone.
probably more along the lines of there's a risk of fire at the house, or there, you know, at a structure, there was a fire, and there needs to be a watch put on, and by the nature of the, or the condition of the individuals involved, are unable to pay.
And I get that there's always going to be some non-collectibles that'll happen, but if you're saying, I mean, you've been doing our audit, this is now your third year.
It's popped up this year.
Yeah, what I'm saying is if a couple of years ago, we basically had, you said a small amount at the fire department, and it's jumped to 13, I just wondering if we could take a look at who those uncollecteds are, and I'd like to notify all of our other, I mean, we do the same thing on if somebody is not paying their bills to the town and they come to us for a renewal of a liquor license, food license, you know, if they haven't paid their MELD bill, pay it, or you're not getting your license renewed. I mean, I think we should be looking at this as well, given that these are not,
Yeah,
I don't know, I haven't seen the list.
what I would love to see, and maybe it exists, Andy, correct me if I'm wrong, but is a policy on both fire and police. At what point, you know, what's the collection enforcement? You know, is it permits? Is it, you know, other means of you know, the building permits, or even the license to do business, if it's a business in town? Do you not give them that license? At what point is it uncollectible? At what point do you write it off? That way you eliminate any bias. It's got to meet these 4 or 5 points. Once it meets these 4 or 5 points, like this could be a business that's just out of business. You'll never collect it.
Yeah, and I get that.
So
And
you
that's
just gotta write it off.
kind of why I want to
Yeah.
see it, but what's caused that to happen? And if we have folks that are
Yeah.
just not paying, I can't remember what it was we did a couple of years ago that we changed that allowed us to go after uncollected revenues.
Yeah, we've done a couple of them. We did a couple when Don was here as the treasurer collector. Statutory adoptions that allow us to lien property,
Okay.
but we can look into
This was
that.
on water
Yeah,
fines.
there was one on water, there was one on, with respect to sanitation code violations. I think there were a couple of them.
Okay.
Okay, next is capital there's some stagnant balances in capital projects. I think there was in fact, there was 163,000 for capital projects. There was less than 2,000 in activity. Those can be repurposed, or you can actually pay down debt.
So these are warrant capital projects, not bonded capital projects.
Mostly one.
I would think
Some
most
were,
of them are.
some were bonded.
It might be some of the old ones that got bonded.
So those that we can, Sarah and I have already talked about this, those that can be applied to paying down existing debt, and we'll do that where it's appropriate and allowed. The others will close out at the end of this fiscal year, end of 19.
So it's a little bit of found money. It sounds like you finished the project and you came in under budget, so there's a little bit left over, and rather than letting it sit there, you know, put it to use, so have it go back to free cash. And then the one that keeps popping up every year, which we're gonna, don't know if it will ever get fixed, but we're gonna have to keep putting it in here, and, you know, and we'll sound like we're repeating ourselves every year, is the checking department down at the light department. The checking account down at the light department is still in the custody of the light department, and it should be in the custody of the treasurer. The treasurer now does get the bank accounts and is a signator on it, which wasn't the case when we first arrived. But you've still lost that element of control, and
How much money is in that account on any given day?
it's not a lot of money. It's probably about $20,000. You know, and then it's really to pay down where you owe someone, so they don't have to go through the whole warrant process and refunds, overpayments, things like that. And It's more there, from what I understand, as I don't audit that account, I don't audit the light department, it's there more as a convenience to the patrons.
Well, I would think that you still should, be able to have the convenience, somebody at the light department gives it, the refund check, to the customer, but have that account with, nothing, in it, or very little in it, and then every day, there's an electronic transfer by the treasurer into account to cover the checks that were written, you solve both problems.
Right.
The thing is, it's against the general laws of Massachusetts. So you can set it up a million ways till Tuesday to figure out the controls
And their
around it.
argument is purely about
Customer service.
customer service. So
So
what
it's-
does every other entity do that has to do this?
Well, a comparable is excise tax. When you move out of a community, and you get a rebate on your excise.
Well, you've sold the vehicle.
Yeah, and you have to wait a couple of weeks for the check to be processed.
Yeah, They're worried
And it
about
comes
people moving and having to get a new address, but
Right.
they certainly could do that.
I understand their point.
Even though it's against the law?
Yeah. I understand a lot of things that are against the law.
We're not gonna solve the problem tonight.
No, we do numerous towns that have light departments. This is the only one that's got its own, that does have its own account. All the others go through the warrant process, and they wait a couple of weeks to get their check. So, I'm just the messenger.
We won't shoot you.
So, Public Works.
So actually, just to that point, can we actually just send a note to the light department? I know we talk about this every year, but can we just send a formal note reminding them again that under Mass General Law? Chairman, I'd like to make a motion that we send a letter to the municipal light department reminding them yet again that the refund checking account, or, no, it's not a slush fund, but the
Checking account.
the checking account that they have is not in compliance with Mass General laws. Include some information on that, and send them a letter saying that we believe that we, as a department of the town, need to be in compliance with Mass General laws.
Second?
Okay, any discussion? All in favor?
Aye,
Aye.
thanks.
Okay, so the Department of Public Works. We went down there, we spent about a day down there, and a couple of phone calls back and forth, just to get an understanding of how the department operated, if there were areas that could be improved, if the operation was efficient. It was actually good timing, because there's been some new people coming on board. The superintendent was the deputy, and he was promoted from being the deputy. He's been with the town a long time. The new deputy came on November of 2018, brought a lot of experience from other communities that he's worked at. And then you got the office administrator, who's been there, I believe, two years at the Public Works. So there's basically a whole new team down there. And I think a lot of things had been put in place before I even got there. I know Paul was improving the Chapter 90 process, and the clerk had been using spreadsheets more, getting away from the manual side, looking into softwares. So there was already a lot of things going on. Each of these individuals has their own strengths. The superintendent, he'll be the first to tell you, don't email me something, because I don't know how to read the email. I'm just exaggerating a little bit, but anything, computerized or anything, we go to the clerk for. The superintendent knows the field very well, knows the operations well. The deputies knows the paperwork really, really well, and has a good understanding of that. So I think together as a team, there's a lot of synergies there that are gonna work well going forward. And, you know, so we were definitely pleased with that. The operations, or the Public Works oversees water, the transfer station, parks, highway, and cemetery. We don't have to read all into all of those things. But those are the main five items that are overseen by the Public Works Department. So one of the things that we had talked about, which the office administrator voluntarily had told us, is for each warrant, I do this, I then do this, and I then do this. And I don't know why. And so we made some phone calls, because I thought there was extra work being done in those areas. You're basically filling out the same information on different spreadsheets. So I talked to Sarah, I said, hey, why do we do this as a town? And I guess it's done for every department. So it definitely is something that Sarah agreed was redundant. I didn't know if Sarah was doing it for some sort of control purposes, and she said that's existed since before I was even here. So I think now that Munis is remote and speaks to the accountant's office, one of those spreadsheets is not needed because you're speaking directly through Munis, whereas in the past, that wasn't happening. So one of the really good things that's come out of this process is we've eliminated, or helped the town eliminate, this one item that just took a long time, from what I understand, to really just put together. So I don't know if it's in play yet, but that's a.
Does that same process happen for payroll? Is there a redundant, because I know before we had some redundancy that,
It's getting improved since we moved to the Munis payroll module.
And this efficiency that's coming into the DPW, is that same efficiency going to hit other departments?
Yes.
It should, yeah.
Right, and so how does that translate into time saved? Or time to be put to...
Productivity?
Yeah.
Yeah,
The thing is, this is one of the, like in, say, the town clerk's office, that doing that extra step is not really a big time saver. In Public Works, it's a big time
well,
saver.
if you look at our vendor warrants, you know, the town clerk's section is this big, Public Works, fire, police,
Fire,
much
police,
larger.
Public Works are the three biggies. I'm not sure what the school does right now. I don't know if they go through this massive process. I'm not 100% sure, but of the three departments that are town, on the town side, definitely those three are the biggest where you'd save some time on the clerical side, absolutely. And with that, you could do other analysis, other types of things that would be more beneficial to the town. So that's item one.
So just so I'm clear, this is literally just getting rid of a spreadsheet. It's not like this spreadsheet populates something else. This was just keeping a separate list, as I understand it.
Yeah, from what I understand, it was kept. Okay, so in the old days, you'd send the warrant to town hall. Town hall would input into Munis. In order to make sure town hall had the records the same as the department would keep their own record on an Excel spreadsheet. So they would compare the Excel spreadsheet to what the town accountant was putting in Munis.
We don't have a fully operational purchase order system, correct?
Correct.
So are our bigger departments that are doing a lot in vendor services or acquiring goods and services, are we doing any type of purchase orders in advance? Or is this hey, I just bought this, can somebody please pay for it? I mean, and I'm not trying to be flip here, but if we have some level of purchase order approval process, there'll never be a need for a department to keep a list and Munis to have, because you can't send in for approval on
Right.
payment on an invoice unless there's been a purchase order. And the beauty of a purchase order system, or at least a purchase order process, is whoever is that decision maker within the department, he or she is the one that is responsible for saying, I've approved this purchasing, ordering, or whatever this equipment is. Now, I know that doesn't happen overnight, but that should eliminate any need for a redundancy and for a department to keep their list of, here are the 20 items that we've put in for request for payment, and also Munis. And quite honestly, it'll eliminate the need to even input into Munis after a purchase order has already been submitted and approved and now in the system.
Right, it's definitely gonna increase controls. It's gonna create extra work, a purchase order system.
No, I get that. Well, I mean, but it's also, there's a reason for it, too.
Yeah, but it's gonna create some right now, the department heads here are bound by the appropriation line item. So there's no real, okay, is there a purchase order for these supplies that were bought, and then the purchase goes against that purchase order? Right now, that's not happening. The department head just knows we have this line item, we can spend up to that line item. Once we go over that line item, we know we're in trouble.
But with a purchase order, you have the ability to do, at the beginning of the year, hey, I know we're gonna be purchasing X amount
Right.
of gravel, whatever the case is, and you're doing a blanket purchase order for that you're drawing down from. It
Right.
actually gives you some better controls and.
Absolutely. No, the controls in a purchase order system absolutely go way up. No question about it. It does add some time, especially to the accountant's department is gonna have some time, unless the department heads are entering the purchase orders and the town accountant is just using that as an approval process. But certainly, it would increase controls. And this town is kind of, you look at it and you say, does it really work in a small town? If you go to a place like a Cambridge or a Malden or something like that, you have to have it. You have to have it in place or it's gonna just go out of control. I think you're right at that cusp of saying, do we need it, don't we need it? And you're right there. You're not small enough where I say, definitely don't do it, and you're not big enough where I say, definitely do it. So you've got a decision to make there to say, do we wanna bring in a purchase order system versus the extra work, and let's look at that balance. But it is a good point.
Thank you.
So we looked at Chapter 90 next. There was a project on Mill Street, reclamation work on Mill Street and some milling work on East and River Street. The total costs were just short of $265,000. I mean, the paperwork was superb. It was meticulous, it was detailed, it was easy to follow. This was paperwork prepared by the prior Public Works superintendent. And the reimbursement forms were there. The only thing I saw was that the reimbursements could have been done quicker. They were a little bit behind. In this situation, probably could have been done 4 or 5 weeks earlier, the reimbursements. So what I talked to Paul about was just, as you go through the Chapter 90 process, just keep in mind that while you're spending the money, you're draining the town's cash, because you're not going to get reimbursed until after you've spent it and submitted all those invoices to the state. And then the state takes 2 or 3, 4 months even to get your money to you. So you want to be as quickly as you want to do it as quickly as you can on your end to avoid any issues that the state may be delaying also. This is really important towards the end of the year, because the Department of Revenue is going to reduce free cash if they see that you haven't submitted for reimbursement when you put in your balance sheets. If they see those Chapter 90 deficits, they're going to want to know where the reimbursement forms are. If you haven't submitted the reimbursement forms yet, they're going to hit you for free cash for those deficits.
Tony, we have a complete streets project coming up that's gonna probably take from like April through September. It's gonna overlap fiscal years. Would you recommend tightening up as much as possible by the end of June and getting as much?
You can do progress submission. You don't have to wait till the end.
Right.
And on something that's going to be 6 months, what's it, about a 400,000, 400,000?
Well, total, yes, but the actual complete streets part, it's only 170. The town funds in Chapter 90 will take up the rest of it.
Yeah.
So it's gonna be like a little bit here, a little bit there.
Yeah, I mean, you know, on a project like that, you don't want to do you don't want to keep doing reimbursements, because that's kind of inefficient. But if you've got quite a bit towards the end of June, think about doing it,
All right, thank you.
rather than doing it in October or November. So, the fields next. And this was a little bit of one that no one really knew a lot about, okay? So the town rents its parks to private organizations like soccer, men's softball. So we asked for the field use policy, and the answer was there might be one, but we don't know where it is. So we weren't sure if there was one or not. Just wanted to know how you come up with a price for soccer versus the men's softball. Like, how's the pricing work? Is there like a menu of, if you're a baseball team, it's this, if you're soccer, it's this, if it's football, it's this, you know, what is it? There's private events too. So and this will kind of dovetail into the next comment as well. Actually, the one I'm talking about is Corey, so Corey certification, but.
That makes me nervous that there hasn't been any requirement. I mean, most of these leagues are doing Cory checks already on their coaches and staff, so that's already happening. We need to, if we're.
You need to get the certification
Absolutely.
from the league directors saying that they've quarried everybody, to have it in your file, to prevent you from having liability in that situation. So that's the Corey side of the rental. And then I had jumped the gun, but there's no set rental price. It's not clear who prices the users. There's no agreements between the users and the field. And then, you know, I see the Little League down there. They're on the fields, but I don't see them being charged. So you've got to, in your policy, you got to say, well, why are we charging this group but not this group? You know, what's
Yeah, so I think our communication with these leagues and different regular users of our fields has finally gotten good. Thank you. But, you know, we have some leagues that have come to us and said that they want to contribute or increase dollars that they're providing to the town, what seems to have been like an in lieu of use payment, so to speak. Some of it has been they've paid for updates and others that have occurred. I think at some point, and this is going to take some time, we got to get a really set, I mean, there shouldn't be reinventing the wheel. There's got to be enough towns around us that have some model park and recreation use processes in place. If not, I mean, I know Masco just went through one that caused a lot of turmoil, and there was a reason why they did it, because it had been some hodgepodge over there. We should maybe look at what Masco has done as well, but get to something. And then I think we need to just come up with a fee structure. So the Public Works Department isn't in the position when a new group comes in, some new sport comes in, and they say, so what's the fee? I mean, I don't want to leave it to him to say, well, this is what I think it should be, and then somebody else is going to be saying, well, why are they paying less or more? And then everybody points at him, and then somebody calls to complain. That's a terrible position to put them in.
Yeah, about 12 to 14 years ago, there was a discussion about these fees at the Recreation Commission. You know, they, you know, had, you know, that discussion. They were supposed to come up with, you know, something that the DPW would administer. So some of, that's about, I think that's about when, you know, any fees started to be being paid. Before that, it was, you know, just kind of, okay, let us know where you're gonna be, and, you know. So,
Yeah, and it is a pretty informal process now, and it's, you know, some of the groups, it's, for some of the sports leagues, it's, you know, they agree to donate $10 per kid. But it's not really written down anywhere. It's the sort of gentleman's agreement that's been in place for a while. So, it's certainly something worthy of formalizing a little bit better.
Even like who cleans up the field after it's done? Is it left for the Public Works, or should the user group?
And we've had problems in the past where fields have been left not clean, and there's a gentleman's agreement, hey, when your team's done, pick up your trash. We have a bring-in, bring-out policy at our fields, which hasn't always worked with some of the different groups, and so we've been had to resort to, hey, if you guys don't clean up, you can't come back next time. And then that goes nowhere fast, so. At a minimum, the only thing I would ask coming into the spring season when these fields are gonna be reopening again, we obviously aren't gonna get to a policy of a rental process and a fee process by then. Can we just get to a query process? And, you know, and it doesn't have to be the Public Works Department that's gonna send out notification to these fields, but we need to notify these groups that we know we're using them. And many of these groups we've been communicating with on field issues and mowing and so forth, at least state you need to have query forms in place for your adults that are there.
And insurance, too. The insurance
Yeah.
is important in case somebody gets hurt on the field.
Are we collecting that now?
If we do, it doesn't come to us. It may be collected at DPW, but I'm not sure.
So we at least have a binder in place and they provide that to us.
The next area just deals with user fees. There are some fees collected down, and they're turned over to the treasurer on a turnover form. Unlike the disbursements where the disbursements are entered at the department level, turnovers are not. They're entered by the treasurer into Munis. So what the administrator had informed me is that she doesn't reconcile the records from the Public Works back to the treasurer's or accountant's office. And I think that's important to do, just to make sure that you've got your own set of records, your own spreadsheet down at the department level, and then that balances with whatever got entered into Munis. And that should be done at least quarterly. There's not a lot, it's not a lot of work, because there's really not a lot of fees that the cemetery we'll talk about in a second, but other fees, there's really not a lot going on, so it's not as bad as it may seem. And we actually did some reconciliations while we were down there, and I said I'd come down and check to see if you did them in June. So hopefully that's gonna happen. The cemetery, so here's one that was a little, I shouldn't say unorganized, just a lot of moving parts. So to try to figure things out, and it's a cemetery. So you've got your plots that you're selling, you've got, other things that are going on at the cemetery that you charge fees for, and it was done in all like different ledgers and different paperwork. I was told that you folks, through the compact cabinet, have picked up some money to actually buy some software and pull it all together. So now you're gonna have, from what I understand, you can have GIS, someone can call, you can know exactly where the lots are that are available, right? Everything's gonna be online, so I think it's gonna be a really neat program, and I'd love to see it in play once it's up. There was about $80,000 collected from activities, so it's enough to keep a good ledger on. And quite frankly, I haven't really seen this in play, the cemetery software. Most cemetery departments keep it exactly the way it is here. Some manual, some on spreadsheet, and it's just difficult to follow. So I'm happy with that. Next, just on the private snowplow contractors, I put an example here of what you should be getting from them. And right now, it's kind of like, we hire people, they go out, and I think you need to just protect the town and have a bunch of things in your agreements with these private snowplow operators when they're going out.
Should this agreement also reflect the additional insurance that they have to carry?
It should, yep.
Kenny and Paul and I have already talked about this, so beginning next snow season, we're gonna, or in advance of that, we're gonna have contracts in place with all the contractors.
I know it's hard enough getting contractors, but I get it.
Right.
There's just some liability with the whole snow removal process, and you really want to cover yourselves. And then the human resource function down at the department. all the files are kept down there, the personnel files and everything. And that really should be shifted to a human resource, which you and I talked about
Sent him
that.
an email that said, I'm
Yeah, you
coming
and I
for your
talked about that,
files.
so
Yeah.
that's well on its way. And, yeah, and with Munis payroll, which I found out was something that was going on, the thing that you should really look into at some point is time and attendance, where everything's.
I thought as part of
Is it
the
in?
HR
We
module,
do.
we're getting time and
Yeah.
Okay.
attendance.
Yeah, we started that last year.
Is that, what is it, there was an issue with the one-day thing, I think, on the payroll, that you had brought up, we really didn't get into.
Oh, there was the issue,
The Thursday, the week
Yeah.
ending on Thursday.
We worked that.
That's
there
been
was,
worked out,
you know,
okay.
some
that was separate from time and
communication issues.
attendance.
Yeah.
It was
Okay.
more just an internal processing thing.
Yep.
Okay, so that's it. Any questions, concluding questions, or? I know I only had 15 minutes.
I want to
and
thank the
took an
Public
hour.
Works Department, the three folks that are here, and also our full management team, specifically the finance team. I know there's been a lot of turnover in the last 5 years, really, here, from the top down, and I think you called it out really well in this report, that our financials are really tight. The staff and the folks that are in charge of this are doing a really good job, and I think the Public Works is a perfect microcosm of that, the change that's happened there, and I think the activities that are tightening up all of this. I mean, all in all, this is a really good report that you put together. The management letter is minuscule. One item is completely out of our control. Thank you, Meld. But, you know, it's a much different management letter than we got the first year from you. And I know when you come in as a new auditor, the first year is usually the most, because you're digging and scratching. And after 20-some-odd years of a management report of everything's great, don't change anything, the town's running a lot better, and I think a lot of that is due to the work that you and your staff has done of empowering the folks here to understand some of the changes. So thank you for all of that.
Yeah, and I think continuing to go out to the departments is a great idea. So start thinking about who you guys,
Yeah.
folks want me to go look at next, and.
Yeah, so that's one of the things, we weren't picking on DPW this year. The plan will be to look at one department in a little bit more depth. It made perfect sense this year with all the change at DPW. So we haven't identified who it'll be after this current fiscal year. But somebody.
Yeah, if there's a department head turnover in a department, then
Right.
it gives you the department to look at.
Yeah, so, you know, and I think it was very helpful to Kenny and Paul and Leah, and they were very receptive to it all, too, so, you know, it's nothing to be, I welcome this kind of stuff, and I think they did too, and they saw the benefits of it.
I think some of the department administrative managers are going to be very happy with Leah's recommendation on getting rid of a redundant spreadsheet, so.
Yeah, and just not to leave the school out, there was a few things the first year with the school that they've cleaned up, they've done a nice job with. We went down there and looked at one of their activities last year, which they're now moving towards full automation. So I'll go back, because it was so late in the game, I don't think they've done that yet, but I can go back and double check that on the next audit. So I don't want to leave them out, they've done a nice job too.
Oh, thank you. Any other questions? All right, thank you.
Tony.
Thanks,
Great.
Tony.
Thank you.
All right, we'll go to our next item, which is to discuss the draft intermunicipal agreement between the members of the Essex Regional Emergency Communication Center and State 911 for the joint provision of public safety communications, dispatch, and operations services. So basically, this is the agreement that allows the state 911 to take over operation of the communication center.
That's correct.
And the sort of structure is kind of being kept in place. The police advisory board, the fire advisory board, the chief executive, advisory board. And, oh, by the way, the state 911 system is picking up all the costs, so which is great for the communities.
Right, yeah, so it is, as you say, Mr. Chairman, the structure is very similar to the way it was before. You almost take the sheriff out and plug in state 911. The sheriff had been covering the deficits in the budget over the first 5 or 6 years of the operation. We were still paying on the original per capita basis for our membership, the same for all the communities. Obviously, the state 911 taking it over from a financial point of view works really well for us. It's about $150,000 savings to us, so.
It's also from an operational point, because they know how to run a communication center,
That's
whereas the
correct.
sheriff didn't really have
That's correct.
any past experience in
Yeah,
that.
so the sheriff sort of becomes just the landlord now, still has a seat at the table, but really he's sort of a different position as kind of the landlord, since the rec building is on that property. But you're right, the state 911 operates a similar system in Northampton, and just opened one in, I want to say Middleborough, but I'm not sure. And I think they have one in Framingham. So they certainly have some experience. They also have the benefit of seeing how all these other regional centers have operated. This one is one at former Devon's military base in Air, and a couple of others. So they get a more worldly view of how these are working or not working, and things that, practices that need to be changed. So the communities have all expressed their support. There seems to be a little bit of hedging on the part of Amesbury, which, if you recall, had voted about 20 months ago to leave the rec. They seem to now be leaving one foot in the door, or near the door. So they may go, they may stay. The other thing that it has sort of forced on an operational side is a homogenization of policies and other practices and procedures, so that they're really operating as one unit rather than operating a distinct dispatch for Middleton and a distinct dispatch for Topsfield and Wenham, et cetera. So we think it's, we being my counterparts in town management, we think that it makes a lot of sense, and it's the way to go.
Do you need any formal action?
I'd like a vote of support for the concept of going forward. If you're willing to vote to sign the agreement when it is finalized, that would be great, too.
When do we think this is going to be finalized? So we're pretty sure that we're not going to be making a payment for the next fiscal year.
Correct, correct. So we want to get this in place as soon as possible, and it's been sort of hung up a little bit because we're also, we, now being the rec, is out to bid for new CAD software, and so that's taking a lot of their effort and attention to get that up and running and get things in place for that, prepare for the conversion there. But certainly in the next, probably in the next month, there'd be a formal circulation of a document for signatures.
Right.
And then July 1, it would transition.
How much different is the fee or penalty for opting out of this, under this new arrangement, than it is at the RECC? So I was, under the current structure, so I was seeing what if it happens within the first 3 years or the first 5 years, and any costs that if we did not go to another regional, that there could be
Right.
costs. So is that much different from the current contract? And not that I think we would have any plan to leave there, but I just want to make sure that we're not looking at this just on the, we're saving $150,000 this year.
Right, so one of the things that State 911 has been working towards for a number of years is reducing the number of standalone, particularly small community dispatch centers. They're not efficient. It's hard to attract and retain talent. So they've pushed these regional arrangements. I mentioned the one out in Devens, the Neshoba region. This one, some other ones. So what they don't want to see is, for whatever reason, and usually it's a change in political climate in a community, that Middleton votes to withdraw and go back to running our own dispatch. That is counter to their broader policy and goal. If Middleton votes at some point to withdraw and join with some other existing regional dispatch, they would be okay with that, there'd be no penalty. There's just the waiting period.
Right, so I would think that we would be in support of the concept and be willing to sign a final document that's in substantially the same form as this. Obviously, we couldn't take that vote until we actually see the
Sure.
final document.
Yeah, yep.
So,
And I should have added earlier, the council has reviewed
Yeah, I
this.
was gonna say,
And,
just- I figured they
there were a
would,
few
but-
changes that she made, but nothing too substantial.
Mr. Chairman, I move that we vote to support the concept as devised in this draft intermunicipal agreement for the joint provision of a public safety communications dispatch and operations services. And it's the feeling of this board that we would approve such an agreement that is similar to this.
Second?
all in favor?
Aye.
All right. Next item is to vote to accept the surrender of the all-alcohol license at the Middleton Golf Course, 105 South Main Street, effective March 31st, 2019. Golf courses going out of business as of that date and will have no need of their liquor license.
This requires a vote of the board.
Yes.
I'll make a motion to vote to accept the surrender of the all-alcohol license of the Middleton Golf Course at 105 South Main Street.
Is there a second?
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
All right. Next is reviewing and discussing making a request for up to $380,000 in Community Preservation Act funds to purchase up to a 50-foot buffer on the three sides of the Middleton Golf Course property, the three sides being the sides that are not abutting 114. So in the packet, there is a map that kind of outlines what a 50-foot buffer would look like. The 50 feet, equates to roughly, 10% of the property at the golf course, and the 380 is roughly 10%. It is exactly 10% of the purchase price. So the Community Preservation Committee only acts on projects that are originated by some other body in town. It does not originate anything on its own, and therefore, for the funds to become available, this body needs to ask for them.
And just so we're clear, and for everybody at home, is if we ask for these dollars from the Community Preservation Act Committee, and they are approved, and we implement this 50-foot buffer along the edge and rear boundaries, what this would do is actually put into deeded language that that land could never be used for anything but open space within that buffer. So, and the reason why I'm saying this is for those abutters, then I know there's been some questions by a lot of the abutters on Overbrook and Meadow and others of what is going to go behind us. This is actually putting in not a promise in a.
It's a
This
conservation.
is a conservation
And restriction.
restriction that states 50 feet. Nothing can be done on that property. It can't be used for building, it can't be used for any other structure, any other use other than.
Roadways or anything,
Other
or
than
anything.
conservation.
Whenever a purchase is made with CPA funds for open space, a conservation restriction needs to be put in place. And in the two purchases that the town has done in this manner, the Essex Greenbelt is the holder of the conservation restriction. The conservation, restriction specifies what can and cannot be done. In this case, I think the proposal would be that the only thing that would be allowed there is passive recreation, which basically means walking. On the Meadow Drive side, near 114, there is an area of pavement. I would suggest that that area of pavement, be retained as parking for anyone wishing to take a walk around the perimeter. But other than walking, an emergency vehicle could go on it if someone has trips and falls or has a heart attack or something like that. But other than that, nothing can happen on that 50 feet of property that is bought with CPA funds.
And this will give hopefully this is an understanding to the abutters that, the town's serious about our effort to ensure that the future use of this property that we've been talking about for months and months now, that we're serious about keeping an appropriate, reasonable, and understandable barrier, and this is just putting our actions where our mouth is.
So, the Community Preservation Committee would, need to recommend to town meeting that funds be used. Town meeting would have to agree to buy the property and to accept the use of the community preservation funds. It could choose not to do it, but usually it's always willing to accept CPA funds. So,
And that doesn't limit our ability on 50-foot buffer. In some cases, could be a greater buffer than that, but it's just not purchased by these funds.
yes.
I
Right
don't know if
now,
that's
under the-
clear, but
right
I
now,
know we
under
say
the
50,
zoning-
we've said 100, let's make sure that we're clear that
Right
people
now,
know
under
that-
the zoning that is there today,
Yeah,
you could build within 25 feet of the property line.
right.
So, it's never been our intention that that would be the case, but this is at least giving some clarity that we are putting a very clear buffer around. And it should also be noted that in the back part, there are some areas that are wetter that would likely preclude anything even being as close as the 50 feet anyway.
Right. So is there a motion to request the $380,000 from the Community Preservation Committee?
I'll make the motion to request up to $308,000 in Community Preservation Act funds to purchase up to a 50-foot buffer on the three sides of the Middleton Golf Course property.
Is there a second?
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
All right. 380.
380, 10%.
Sorry about that.
All right.
If they want to give more, we're fine with that, too.
380, there's only 393,000 in the fund, so, through FY '19.
I understand.
There's more coming for FY '20. All right, now we'll review the special town meeting warrant.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. The warrant has been sent to the printer and it was posted, I believe it was posted yesterday by the constable. It's a two-question or a two-article special town meeting, both related to the to the Middleton Golf Course acquisition. Article 1 is is what you might call the biggie. That is the request for an appropriation of $3.8 million for the acquisition of the property and for the purpose of developing or for municipal purposes. We've been at this for a while. As a kind of a recap, mostly for I know the board members remember it, but for those maybe at home who weren't tuned in earlier when we were talking about this earlier months ago, we had an arrangement or a handshake agreement with the owner of a parcel behind, a 25-acre parcel behind Angelica's, to buy that for $3.8 million. That was back in August that we arrived at that. We had announced it in September, and we were admittedly at that point overpaying a bit for that property because it was really the only game in town. It was the only choice that we had, and we were frankly desperate for land. We've been trying for many years to figure out a solution for our fire station and some other public buildings, and it always dead-ended at where do we build it. And the existing parcel on Lake Street, 4 Lake Street, where the current fire station is only, I think it's 11,000 square feet, roughly a quarter of an acre. So as a comparison, roughly the size of most of the lots in the Brigadoon neighborhood. And too small to build a modern fire station with the turning radiuses we need, with the apparatus bays that we would need, and the other office and administrative spaces that we would need. So we went forth in September and went public with our plans to buy that other parcel, and shortly thereafter were approached by the Browns, who own the Middleton Golf Course, and they offered to sell the town that parcel, which is roughly twice the size at 52 acres and 1,000 feet of frontage on South Main Street versus the other parcel, which was about 73 or 4 feet of frontage. So much greater visibility, still within that mile radius of the geographic center of the town, which really is 4 Lake Street or is Middleton Square. So satisfied the location requirement that we'd been struggling with for so many years. Satisfied with room to spare the land area requirements that we had for not only the fire station, but some of these other projects that we need to address at some point in the future. So Tim Hooton Selectman Hooton and I sat down with the Browns, ironed out that agreement that we've talked about a number of times, and the board executed that with the Browns in the weeks following, and we've been moving forward with that process, and we're almost there. 3 weeks from tonight, we'll have the town meeting. We're trying to spread the word and spread information about the acquisition. I've said it in every conversation that I've had with people. It's not lost on me at all that $3.8 million is a lot of money, and I'm not going to tell people that it's not, or in any way diminish the impact of it, but it is critically important for us to acquire property in order to address the fire station and the other future needs. And this offers the town the best opportunity to do that. I mentioned earlier with respect to the other parcel, we were admittedly overpaying for that one. We are underpaying for this one. The appraisal is more than $4 million for the golf course property, so we are getting it at a to use the sports contract analogy or parlance, a hometown discount. So we are extremely fortunate to have the Browns as the developer, original developer, builder, and longtime owner, 55-year owner of the course. And so it's a remarkable opportunity, and really the sort of the linchpin for moving forward with the fire station project, which has been identified in our facility study from 2017 as the top priority project. Interestingly, Chief Twist has been looking back a little bit at the history of the fire department. He's kind of a history buff when it comes particularly to fire. The station opened in 1954. At the time, fire was upstairs at street level. DPW was downstairs in the sort of drive out in the back. And within 15 years, in 1969, was the first committee studying the space needs of the fire department, because within 15 years, they had already started to expand to the point where they were bumping up against the walls of that station. 1970 was the first town meeting article to expand the station, and it failed, I believe, by a fairly small margin. But it just proves the point that we've been dealing with space limitations at the fire department for 50 years, and it's always been about the land and the inadequacy of that particular lot and the lack of availability of other land. The points that I often make, and it's kind of the throwback to Mark Twain, who said, "Buy land, they're not making it anymore," or words to that effect. Land is not, in Middleton, land is not going to become more plentiful. It's not going to become cheaper, and construction costs are not going to decline over time. And so it's an awesome opportunity for the town, and really an exciting period for the town. So that's the long summary of Article 1, which again is the request for $3.8 million for the acquisition. And then Article 2, related to that, is a request for $325,000 to fund a master development plan of the site. And that is to look at that entire 52-acre parcel and devise the best layout of the fire station on that site, and potential future buildings that would be on that site. Also looking at soil testing and geotechnical testing on the site to determine where the best soils are, looking at the extent of the wetlands on the site, looking at traffic and circulation patterns. So where do we want to come in off of 114? How many access and egress points do we have? What are the signalization options that we have, and what's the approach we're going to have to signalization? So a lot of, I know that there's some frustration in the community. People want to see where the fire station is going to be. Is it going to be on the Brigadoon side, or is it going to be on the northern side of the property? And frankly, we don't know it, and that's what this master development plan is. The other point that I frequently make is that it's a lot of land that we have to work with, and it would be easy for us to be sloppy and inefficient with it. And so this process will help us to be efficient in the use of that property, and efficiency translates into savings, because it means less parking, less pavement for driveways, more efficient use of utilities, fewer cuts into Route 114, shared parking, shared septic, things like that. So it's money well spent, and would have to be done either as a standalone, which is what we're proposing, or rolled into the first project, the fire station project. So the other point that I repeat at every opportunity is that every project that comes forward, or every building that goes forth on this site, will have at least one town meeting vote. And in the case of the fire department, which is the first project, there'll be 2 votes, not counting this town meeting vote. So there'll be a vote for design funding, and then there'll be a vote for construction funding. So even if people are worried about the cost of the building to come, which I certainly understand, this vote on March 19th doesn't lock anybody into any particular investment down the road. So there'll be a lot of opportunities, and the whole master development planning process will be a very public process to understand what the community wants on that site and how to lay that out. So that's kind of the long and short of the warrant. I mentioned earlier the information meetings, and I'll repeat that. So tomorrow night, February 27th, and then next Tuesday night, March 5th, both here at the Fuller Meadow School cafeteria at 7 o'clock. The other thing that I know has come up, I've seen it on social media, people have asked me, is the whole issue of voting at town meeting and voting by proxy or voting by absentee at town meeting. The whole nature of town meeting is that the entire community is there in one place on one day, and you hear the debate, you hear the pros and the cons and the questions and answers. So because of that, there is no way for absentee voting or proxy voting to take place. And I understand that people have travel plans or what have you. Legally, there's no way for us to allow or accept absentee or proxy votes. So, but the town clerk certainly can answer that probably more eloquently than I can. But that's the long and short of it for the warrant. It'll be mailed out in about a week and a half.
Okay. One thing relating to the warrant, Tim Hooton, who couldn't be here tonight, has, written a letter to be submitted to the paper in support of, the golf course purchase. I would suggest that we all add our names to it and, submit it, under all 5 names, if that is agreeable to all of you.
Yeah. I've said so to Tim. And if that's the case, I would, I know we are the author of this warrant article, but just for clarity, I think that we should also take a motion that this board unanimously supports both warrant articles as well as the letter to the editor explaining our rationale for supporting.
And I would, our next meeting is the 12th. And Rick, you won't.
It won't be it.
All right, so let's take that, vote now. I was gonna see if, on the 12th, if all 5 of
Five
us
would be
was
there.
here, but it doesn't look like.
There's a good chance I wouldn't get here.
Yeah, okay. So, who would like to make a motion in support of both warrant articles?
I made the motion, just need a second.
Second?
Okay, all in favor?
Aye.
All right. So, anything else on the special town meeting?
No, just folks, please come out, be heard. It's your chance to vote on arguably one of the most important items that's come before the town in many a year.
Right, and understand exactly what it is we're undertaking.
Okay. Next is the review, purchase and sale agreement and/or second extension of offer to purchase the golf course, and sign or authorize the chairman or town administrator to sign, subject to town council's review and approval. Andy?
So we signed a an extension, the so-called first extension, a few weeks ago. We have pushed that out for one more week to try to get everything in place for the purchase and sale agreement. So this would extend to March 5th.
And is there a motion to sign the second extension?
So moved.
Second?
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
All right, next, we have to review and adopt two policies, the acceptance of gifts and grants policy and the designer selection policy. The gift policy, basically says what we have been doing in practice, that any gifts over $500 have to be accepted by, the Board of Selectmen. Lesser amounts can be, accepted by a particular board or committee or employee. And, we have to accept all grants that are, we have applied for and received. So is there a motion on that policy?
Mr. Chairman, I move that we approve the gifts and grants acceptance policy.
Second. All in favor?
Aye.
And the designer selection procedures just outlines how we select and, designate, people to design various projects that we may become involved, which may become very timely if we are to move forward with our public facilities.
Mr. Chairman, I move that we approve the designer selection policy as shown in document attached.
Second?
All in favor?
Aye.
All right. Next is reviewing an addendum with Correct Care Solutions LLC to provide emergent and non-emergent transport services to the patients at Essex County Correctional Facility.
So this one is, there's a new vendor that handles medical care at the prison. It was managed previously by a company called NAF Care that we had an agreement with. So we have an agreement with Correct Care Solutions. Council was okay with the agreement, wanted a little bit more, a few more teeth in it, and more specifically wanted to make sure that the board was signatory. I am authorized under the charter to sign the basic contract, but she preferred that the board be the signatory on this addendum.
So this is the contract for our ambulance that's providing transportation and medical aid, or just transportation?
It's medical aid too, but it's primarily transport.
And the contract's with, with their healthcare company.
Yeah, it's
not
with-
Essex County.
Correct. So Essex County Sheriff's Department contracts with Correct Care Solution, who contracts with us.
And what I'm not seeing is any rates here.
Right, the rates are under the basic contract, and they're the same as we had with NAFCare.
Are they based on a Medicaid payment?
Yes.
What percentage?
I can show, I have the rates here. I don't recall what the
So,
percentage
Mr.
is.
Chairman, I'd ask if we could postpone this, because I actually want to look at the Medicaid rates on this. This is an opportunity to have an open discussion with them, not just on the transfer from one healthcare agency, but to another one that is actually operating it. This is what I do for a living, I'd actually like to look at the rates that are as part of the contract. So I'd ask if we could postpone this.
I'll
Any
send you those
objection?
rates.
Okay, thanks.
Okay, so we will put this off till the next meeting. Is that enough time?
Yeah, it shouldn't take me more than a day.
Okay. Next is, are there any new items that anyone wants to bring up? Okay. If not, we'll Going to executive session under general laws, chapter 30A, section 21A6, to consider the purchase, acquisition, or value of real property, where the chairman declares discussion in open session would have a detrimental effect on the position of the town, and chapter 30A, section 21A3, with respect to the police union and collective bargaining. Rick, would you call the roll?
Selectman Marusky,
Yes.
Selectman Cresta,
Yes.
Mr. Chairman,
Yes.
and myself, yes.
And we will not be returning to open
Just so
session.
we're clear, you,
Only part of it.
yeah, you'll only.
I'll
be part-
recuse for the,
Yeah, I just wanted you to get that on the record.
Police CBA, yeah.
Hey, we will not be returning to open session.